Thank you for joining us for this special conversation around Wuhan Wuhan at the 40th Minneapolis St. Paul International Film Festival. I'm Ken Jacobson, a programmer at the festival, and I'm thrilled to be here today with director Yung Chang. Congratulations on the film, Yung, and it's great to have a chance to speak with you today.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy we can do this, and thank you to MSPIFF for having the film, and thank you to you, Ken, and programmers for picking us.
Of course, well deserved. I wanted to start the conversation by going back to the beginning, by which I mean your own awareness of COVID way back when, and when you first started tracking on COVID and began to realize, as you know, the rest of us did, how serious this was likely to become. And then when did your filmmaker brain kind of kick in and contemplating the possibility of, you know, maybe this is something that I should document?
That's a great question. I mean, I think I was part of that group who, in the early days of COVID, you know, firstly, let me put things in context. I have a brother and family living in Beijing. In December, I started hearing from them that there was this virus, and I felt confident at the time that it would remain in China. Like I had this feeling because, you know, I'd been through SARS. In fact, in 2002, was it? I was in Guangzhou at the time SARS broke, and then I was on my way back to Hot Docs Film Festival for premiere of my very first film, a short medium-length film called Earth to Mouth. And I quarantined for, you know, the required amount of days, and then was back at it. You know, that was, so my brain was thinking, oh, this is like SARS back then. And I was actually on the road. I was traveling with my previous 2019 film, This Is Not a Movie, about the journalist Robert Fisk. And I was just returning in March from Los Angeles, a trip to LA, where I was showing the film at an event. And I remember there was some tension there. I remember in the airplane, people started wearing masks. There was a lot of hand sanitizing going on. There's a gentleman sitting across from me who was coughing incessantly throughout the trip. And then I started to think, oh, this is a little worrisome. I wonder, should I be a little worried? And then, sorry, this is a long-winded story, but I don't know if it puts context in things. I remember feeling, all right, this is nothing. I got home, went to a music concert with that was sold out. Apparently, the most people that ever attended a concert by this artist before, named Destroyer, and it was packed. And then we were joking about it's so awkward to think of it now in hindsight, but it was just sort of like, this is nothing, you know, and we were feeling nothing. And then the lockdown in Toronto, just at the end of March. And, you know, I think there was a series of events that kind of led me to making Wuhan Wuhan. And one of them was just an anti-Chinese racist incident that my daughter and I had in our neighborhood in West End, Toronto. That I hadn't experienced something like this since I was a child growing up in a small town outside Toronto, and it was shocking to me. You know, it was directed towards my daughter, and it was just that the inklings of something unsettling, you know, destabilizing. And I went home, and it was locked down now, so there was no traveling. The film that I was promoting was on hold now, and festivals halted. Just this feeling of the world dropping out from under me and being stuck in this house was the feeling of well, this, you know, my sanity requires that I work and travel and make film, you know. Now what? And then just reading about the case numbers and the, you know, people contracting the virus and just how horrible that was, and seeing that spread around the world, and then seeing the vitriol also attached to Wuhan, the city, and hearing about you know, the virus being called the China virus and Kung flu and all of that context to it. And a week after the anti-Chinese incident, I received an email from a company called Starlight Media based in LA, and they asked if I'd be interested in taking on the footage of 300 hours of footage that was filmed by my film crew in February and March of 2020. And would I be interested in turning that into a film and seeing that, piecing it together? And I'd never done that before. It was my first experience. I was hesitant. I asked to look at some of the footage. I watched 10 hours that they sent to me, and I was floored by the material. I was floored by the characters and the access. I felt a kinship to the approach to the filmmaking, that observational kind of character study of people. And I committed to seeing this film through. That's the long story.
And how did that film crew get on that project? How did they get the permissions to shoot? How did they get access to, the main locations? And how did they go about casting the film?
So the crew was a team of 30, and they were in Wuhan in January in pre-production for a documentary they were about to make about the Yangtze River. In fact, it was absolutely not about COVID at all. And they were locked down in the city at the time. And I guess, they had the inkling to use their access. And now in China, if you're a documentary team, you usually have permissions and are aligned with, whether it be the national broadcaster or something like that in order to get access. That's what a lot of Chinese independent filmmakers do. There's this approach to filmmaking where you have 1 foot in and 1 foot out, if you know what I mean. And so I believe that the crew used that access to pivot and get entry into these locations. But not only the hospitals, you see in the film, they find everyday people. And that's what really struck me. The young couple, for example, in the movie, that to me is the through line of the film. I connected very closely with those characters, and also just the intimacy and of the footage was just, to me, kind of really eye-opening and wonderful in a way. And so, I credit the crew for just sort of digging down and finding these characters. I think they had time to build intimacy and trust with everyone. And the way it works with independent filmmaking is, once you get access, you let the camera roll. And any interaction I've had with my colleagues, whether they be fellow documentary filmmakers or producers, there's a real purity to the approach to observational filmmaking by these documentary filmmakers. And I think it has something to do with just this belief in capturing truth and not censoring it. You know what I mean? So the footage was raw, and that is what we had. It was quite wonderful stuff.
Did you have any contact with them, or did you basically you got these?
So yeah, that's a good question.
All this footage, and it's just like, okay, it's yours now. Your baby.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting. So I think for me, usually as the director, I'm on location. I'm filming everything. I know the ins and outs. I know all the hassle and all the work it requires to film something before and after a scene, what it takes to get into something. So oftentimes as the director, if I'm on a film like that, where I'm the one who filmed it, I'm usually too close to the footage, and I need a little distance. So the stage of going into post-production is one where I kind of let the editors kind of handle the first round of assembling the footage. And but for Wuhan Wuhan, I was now in the privileged position of being distanced from the footage, not overly familiar with the ins and outs of it. So I wasn't trying to filter anything with what I had at my disposal, the 300 hours. I was almost like an editor, or just sort of wearing an editor's cap, having that objective distance and seeing through the footage, seeing what was the bad stuff, even though it may be a little bit pretty good, really kind of, for me as a director, this was the first experience where I jumped into a film and I could just kind of carve out the story much quicker than I've ever had, because in the past I've had to deal with holding on to the babies that I want to keep in to the end of the film. And in this instance, for Wuhan Wuhan, it was remarkably a fast experience, even though I was working remotely with editors in Los Angeles. That was the biggest, change for me when approaching this film, and it was interesting for me. It was a very rewarding experience. I think, just because of the that openness that I could have with the footage, but also just the relationship with my team. I had a big team of editors, 2 lead editors, 2 associate editors. I've never worked with so many before, and all of Chinese descent. And we were all kind of driven by this passion to humanize this faceless, city that I think, I've traveled and visited in my past, and just think it's an amazing cosmopolitan city with a very vibrant culture and music culture. The music, incidentally, by the composers of the film Hualun are from Wuhan, and they actually composed the music for a film that I loved. Came out a couple of years ago, called An Elephant Sitting Still. You may recall, art house black and white Chinese film, and I loved the soundtrack, and the fact that I found out that they were from Wuhan, the band, it just sort of linked up. So we kind of did that throughout the movie. Found as many connections as we could to make it feel wholesome.
Were the 5 or 6 main story characters and storylines that we see in the finished film, were there other characters and storylines that we didn't see? And how did you mentioned the story of the young couple, but and using that as a through line, but how did you land on the other stories, and then which ones didn't make it in, if there were any?
There were 9 characters followed. So yeah, I mean, I think so. It was there was a process of the assembly and kind of going through every single scene and every other character. The 4 other characters were, there was a hairdresser, there was a pharmacist couple, there was a medical waste disposal team, and there was a vlogger, and I think it was all very good footage, all very well filmed, very intimate. But then I think what we were finding was a little overlap with some of the storylines and themes that would come out of the material. And so even if, for example, the hairdresser was a more powerful character, I think we were seeing too much similarity between the young couple and the hairdresser. You had to let go of some of the material, and it just came down to whittling it down to the 90 minutes that you've watched. These were the strongest storylines that work together. And I think for a multi-character driven story, you have to find that kind of balance through it. And not everyone, even if not everyone's going to make it. And which is unfortunate, but I think in sacrifice for the bigger film, I think that's usually the objective.
It must have been interesting for you to, in some ways, have this privileged view of what was going on at, ground zero in Wuhan, that, those of us who were just consuming this through the mass media didn't see. And I'm just curious what that was like for you, and were there any revelations about, this part of the story is not really getting out to the public, or there are some nuances that are getting lost?
So I think I was in a privileged place receiving this footage because it was kind of like a window into what we were about to go through in some ways, because I started editing in April 2020, and the footage was a full arc of the first wave through Wuhan, which ended up being the only wave, which ended up being the end of the spread of the virus in more or less, in the numbers that they had been seeing until that point in April 2020 is when Wuhan opened up. So I was seeing footage that was the ICU and hospital footage, which was sort of very disturbing, very horrifying. I hadn't seen any other footage in the hospital unit that was so intimate, and until 76 Days, filmed by my colleague Wuhan made. But this footage, to me, was shocking and very real, and I think what if there are any lessons I learned from the making of this film, it was, so firstly, it was very an emotional experience having to deal with this footage every day as we were, you know, evolving with it ourselves here in Canada and North America, the US, around the world, and seeing how different countries were tackling the virus. It seemed like almost every country kind of bungled it, you know, in the early days, and as much as China had bungled it. And is bungle a word? I don't even know, but did I use it correctly? but but then to see how in a country like China, you know, the next step was just to clamp down on it and see how these temporary, for example, the temporary hospital shelters, how they popped up so immediately and were dealt with to handle these asymptomatic cases. You know, even though it seems quite you know, Kafkaesque in a way, just being stuck in these places. You know, it seemed like that was the step necessary to stop the spread of the virus. So I look at that footage even today. I look back at it and really kind of like I think about how, in a way, efficient the system was to kind of clamp down on the spread of COVID, and they did so successfully. You know, obviously there are trade-offs, and my brother and his family in Beijing are and my brother happens to be a traditional Chinese medical doctor in Beijing. And so, you know, he tells me about things, you know, how they have to be, there's a tracking app that has to be green light to pass. And if there's a case in their building unit, for example, the entire unit is shut down, and everyone, including babies and children, are tested in a 24-hour window, and you cannot leave until you get the positive green light. So, I mean, that kind of system seems like, you know, it could work, which clearly in the rest of in the West, it's just not done that way. So, and I think we are seeing the aftermath of that, and blah blah.
Yeah, wanted to ask about two things around the shooting of the film. One is the, you know, the precautions the crew took, and whether you know, there were a lot of unknowns about the virus for sure when they started shooting. And, you know, did you, I know you weren't there, but did you later find out, you know, just what precautions they took? And then the second is about censorship, or just, you know, any government minders who were there, either, you know, with them or that they had to check in with. I mean, there's one, it's a small moment, but I think there's one moment where we first see them in the ward, and you can't really see who it is, but somebody says, you know, it's pretty bad in this part of the ward. You should probably start down at the other end. So that made me wonder about just.
Yeah, incidentally, that was a nurse who was in that direction. In terms of minders and censorship, let me talk about that one. As far as I saw in the footage, and I have received all the raw footage, there were no minders on location. In my experience in the past, making films in China, where we had to get special permissions, usually no minders at all, as long as you have that piece of paper. I think it was so chaotic at the time, and there was a lot of media covering, you know, within the hospitals, as you see in other films as well, that are out about Wuhan. This was there. This was, you know, people were covering the story. In terms of my crew, I think because of their special access and permissions that they have through their connections, they were able to film freely. And I know that the crew was totally hazmated the entire time. I know that the crew, in my discussions with the team back in Wuhan, or in, you know, the crew that filmed that were in Wuhan at the time, I know that there was a lot of worry and fear and concern. And I think I think that some of the crew carried this through like in a kind of post-traumatic stress way after filming. And I think they're, as far as I'm aware, they're fine now, of course. I think because things got better, but it was a very worrisome period of time. There is a little moment in the film where you see, in the early beginnings of the film, where you see the volunteer driver kind of leaving the city, and we have a shot of this loudspeaker electric car drive by. And if you go back and look, you can pause it on that moment, and you'll see a reflection of the crew in the glass window of the electric car, and you'll see them completely hazmated, and then get a sense of what they had to go through. I mean, I couldn't imagine if I had to do that for 15 hours a day, like the doctors and nurses completely hazmated, what that would be like in terms of filming condition. And it can't be easy. And I think you can also feel that through the camera work sometimes, where you feel the hesitancy in the camera. I think our editors did a great job of kind of working around the shakiness of that kind of footage, but pulling out some of the more dramatic moments from the footage. But in the raw footage, it was definitely, you hear the chatter and the carefulness and the sensitivity in which the crew were approaching these stories, and being aware of their presence.
I wanted to ask you about your choices and your editor's choices about what not to show, perhaps, in the ward, and to really the sense, and talk about the sensitivity that you showed in capturing these very intense moments, but I've never felt like you crossed some imaginary line to kind of invade the privacy of these patients. And yet, I'm conscious of the fact that most of them do not have family members in the room. It's just the medical professionals and the crew who are there. Yeah. So in a way, it is a certain, I wouldn't say invasion, but it's just, how did you decide what not to show is really my question.
That's very true. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of it depended on the footage we received. I'm trying to think of anything in the footage I received, the crew never filmed somebody dying. That did not happen. And I wouldn't show it unless there was, morally, ethically, as a film director, I'm wondering if and when I would show something like that. And I'm thinking in particular of an amazing film by a great film director who's long gone, but a director named Alan King from Toronto, Canada. And he made what he called, what did he call it? It was like active cinema. He called it, anyway, he made a film called Dying at Grace, and Grace was a hospital, and is a hospital in Toronto. And he tells three stories of three patients, terminally ill patients, and just with such humanism, such heart, he follows these characters to their last breath. And the last shot of the film is one of the main characters taking their last breath, and it is a remarkable moment, and fearless, because the patients allowed the camera to be present, and that was the difference. So anyway, in this circumstance for Wuhan Wuhan, we didn't come across that footage. There's a shot of a dead body in a yellow body bag that you see early in the film. One thing I can tell you is that we early on in the editing process, we had much more intense ICU footage. But I felt later, as we were evolving emotionally and reacting to the present day evolution of the virus and people's responses to, our collective response to it, I felt at some point that we just didn't need that urgency, the fear of that ICU to come through. We could step away from that. We understand that. And so for me, the point was to just kind of really get into the mindset of the five characters we follow, and see and feel a little bit of what they're going through. People have described, I've been reading people describing Wuhan Wuhan as sort of slightly calm. And I think I think it's true. It captures the pandemic in a way that I think we can relate to. There is a calmness to it for those who are not in the ICU, or when, for example, the footage we have, it captures the aftermath of the January chaos. So we are in a sort of a plateau area. A system was put into place, and that's what we're capturing. And you see that coming through with the emergency doctor and Dr. Zhang, the psychologist, that kind of calmness around that. And I felt like that mirrored in a way some of the experiences that the disconnect I was having as well, being in Toronto but not knowing what was going on in the hospital rooms. So I guess that's part of the atmosphere of the film. I think it's a challenging question to bring that you raise, and I think it's applicable to not only this film but any film. I'm thinking of Robert Fisk in This Is Not a Movie, and there's a sequence where we talk about dead bodies, and he talks about it from the journalist perspective, which is people should see the realities of war. He's talking about specifically, and I don't equate the two. I don't think the pandemic is a war in that regard. It's not necessarily governments causing the death to other people, innocent people. I think, and one could argue maybe they are, but it's not really that. And so that was why I think we didn't go there with the film.
Well, I thought you handled it really very, very well. So hats off to you. We're pretty much at the end of time, but I know at the end of the film you give us some updates on folks in the film. I'm just curious if you have heard any further updates about any of the people that we see in the movie, or anything you want to share about.
One thing people bring up is, and it's amazing how present this character was, Grumpy Grandpa, as he's come to be known. In fact, we do have a little in memory of at the end of the film, in the end credits, because he didn't make it, unfortunately, and that was news I received as we were kind of locking the picture of the film, and it was quite saddening to get that information. I would add that I think part of the processes for making a documentary is that you have to get release forms from all the subjects involved, even if they've died. The family has to sign for the release for that. And so I'm happy to say that we got release forms from every subject that you see in the movie. Every character willingly signed these releases for us and have seen the film. So I'm quite reassured by that. And I think, maybe the last thing I want to say is, I'm hoping the audience can find a way to reach out to me if they have feelings to express to me about their reaction to the movie. And that's the one sad thing about doing virtually. I can't gauge how you're feeling about it. But we do have our Facebook page, the Wuhan Wuhan doc, and please feel free to write to me about it. I think for some people, their reaction, and what I was hoping for, and what I hesitate to put into words, but we take you through this journey with the young couple, and I know we had this built in, which was the birth of the child, and it was very important to me to get to that moment, and I'm hoping that it hits you in a place that is reflective about our shared experience, and that it was important to me to show the spectrum of emotions that we were all going through, and maybe in particular exampled through the young couple. So that's all I have to say. I thank you all for watching.
Well, thank you, Yung. And I would say the film does make the point that we do all share the same sky. So thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today and allowing us to see your vision through this wonderful, poignant, and just really universal film. So congratulations again. It's great to see you. Take
Great to
care.
see you, Ken. Thank you so much.
And next time we'll do it in person.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesotans.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.